On effective scouting in FRC. I hope this is the right presentation. I hope this is the one that you guys were hoping to come to and not one of the others. I'm Nathan Mills. I'm going to be taking you guys through this one. So first of all, really basic, what is scouting? What's its purpose? What are you going to use it for? In the basic sense, it's just getting more data on teams for your strategy to figure out what you're doing for your match, later for your pick list, and trying to figure out who you're going to pick, what can you do to get to match the best possible strategy to help you win. There are 4 major parts to scouting that we're going to be going over in more depth throughout the rest of this presentation: collection, storage, data processing, and visualization. These 4 steps really encompass all of your scouting and everything that you're going to be doing. So first of all, data collection. The first part of this is paper scouting. This is probably the easiest form of data collection to do. Anyone can do this. It's very low buy-in, very low resource. You just need a couple of kids and know a little bit of knowledge about the game that you're doing. You're not going to get the best data through it simply because it's going to be very hard to take the data from paper scouting and turn it into another form to look at or better do stuff with. But it's very, very easy to start. And if you're starting a scouting, I'm going to suggest paper scouting to start off. Google Forms is one step up from that. It's still not a ton of work to do to set up a Google form, a spreadsheet that's connected to it. Still relatively easy to do, but you're going to get a lot better data. You're going to get a lot easier form to do stuff with and to visualize going forward. You will need phones or some other sort of devices for each of your scouts if you're planning to use Google Forms, though. You're going to need something to connect to the internet. The internet also isn't always the best at competition. Even mobile data will oftentimes fail you depending on your plans. I'm sure many of you guys have experienced that probably over your years of competition. So that can be a little bit sketchy at times. Just be careful when you're using that. It should still work most of the time depending on what you're doing and what kind of plans your different people have. But overall, just be a little bit careful with that. Still, it's pretty easy to set up and it gives you a lot better data than paper scouting. Finally, you can create your own scouting app. This is a lot more work. It's a lot more effort. It gives you the most freedom and the most control over how you're collecting data, what kind of data you're collecting, all of these things. But it's, like I said, a lot more work. It's a lot more buy-in from not just one individual person, but also a team as a whole. You might need to have the team purchase specific hardware, like tablets or computers or something else, to make the scouting system work. That's a really big buy-in for the team. Same with anything else that you might need. You might need multiple people every year keeping the scouting system up to date, which is a lot more than, say, a Google Forms or paper scouting which would need maybe 1 or 2 mentors a couple of weeks. Not mentors, 1 or 2 members a couple of weeks to keep up to date year to year. So it's a lot more resources, but you're going to get a whole lot more out of it. You're going to get a lot more freedom, and you're going to have a lot more control over everything that has to do with your collection. Out of these 3, Google Forms is probably the best outcome with the least amount of input and the least amount of resources. It's a really great place. If you've got a little bit of time and you guys want to create a pretty good scouting system, that's where we would suggest starting off. Data storage. So how are you going to store your data? You're going to collect it. What are you guys going to do with it? The first thing is spreadsheets. They link to Google Forms. If you guys are doing Google Forms, really great. You can just hit link to a spreadsheet, and it'll do that for you. It'll put all your data in, and it puts in a really nice, easy place for you guys to go look at it later. If you guys want to do anything later with it, with calculations or visually display it, it gives it a really, really easy place to do it. If you guys are doing paper scouting, I'm also going to suggest that you guys try and input it into a spreadsheet, whether it's a Google spreadsheet or anything else. It is very time intensive and can be very difficult, but it's going to make your data so much easier to look at. If you've just got all your data like in a stack of papers, match by match, it's going to be much, much harder to see any trends, any patterns, see any teams that are good or stand out. So really make sure that you at least have something. I'm going to suggest spreadsheets. There are other things that you can do, I'm certain, but that is the way that we found when we do paper scouting sometimes is the best way to visually display that data and to get that data looked at. Finally, there are databases, and there are a number of different kinds of databases that you could use. Most of these are going to be if you're creating your own app, if you're for collection and your own system for scouting. I know a number of the teams here, I think, have done that, and so I would be interested to know later what your guys' databases are and what you guys use. Generally, there's a couple of different kinds. You guys can use SQL databases, you can use non-SQL databases, but really it depends. You just need somewhere to store your data before you run calculations on it and display it. Data processing, this is calculations. This is everything that you're going to do with your data. Once you have your raw data, how do you crunch the numbers on it? How do you turn it into data that is actually meaningful? How do you guys take data, all your data from all the different matches, and make it good to look at and make it meaningful to people who are looking at it? Averages are awesome. How many game pieces did this person score in this match, in this match, in this match? Or how many game pieces did they score on average? Averages are very nice. All sorts of averages. Take them whenever you can. Weighted sums also very good. For example, if you're going into your Picklist meeting and you want to get going on a little bit of a faster movement than normal, maybe you have a weighted sum where, hey, we like these different data points that we're collecting, so we're going to weight them and we're going to create a weighted sum for those different data with those different data points and create a pickability counter. And we'll just use that as a start to roughly order different teams and where we think they should be pickability-wise. And it'll save you a bunch of time, but it obviously won't be able to catch all the nuances or anything that actual members of both scouting or strategy might have seen throughout the competition. But still, it can be very useful. Weighted sums can save you a ton of time. There are also some more complicated calculations in data processing that you can do. For example, predictions. You can try and predict with the past data from the competition, what are the rankings going to be by the end of the qualification matches? Maybe you're sitting there the Saturday night trying to figure out what they're going to look like halfway through Sunday. Well, if you know what the general performances of all the teams are and you know what the matches are going forward, it can be rather complicated, but you can definitely put together some algorithms to try and predict what the outcomes of those matches are. How many RP are they different teams going to score, or what are the scores of the different matches going to be? And based off of that, what are the rankings going to be going into elims and alliance selection? Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but you can get a very good idea of this if you build a good enough calculation and build a good enough algorithm, and if you've got good enough scouting data from whatever you're doing. Generally, these things are going to be hard to do with paper scouting. Once again, like I said, it's very easy to do. You're not going to get the best stuff out of it, though, in regards to that. So, if you're doing either Google Forms or you're doing your own app system, these becomes a lot more easier to do because you can kind of tailor what kind of information do I want a little bit more. You can kind of choose and pick what kind of information and how you're getting it. So it's going to become a lot easier. Finally, last 4 matches. This is something that we do and I want to recommend to you guys. This is where we run similar calculations to everything else I just talked about, but we do base it only off of the last 4 matches that a team has played. So say they've played 7 matches, but maybe their robot was a little bit funky and they broke down a ton in their second match. Well, if they've been performing great since then we don't really want to count that. Their last 4 matches, it really lets us look at just the team's past performance very, very recently, because a lot of teams, especially going into Sunday, if they had a really bad day Saturday, but they're having a much better day Sunday, you want to take that into consideration, because it could greatly affect how you're placing them, and you don't want to place them down further on your pick list or think that they're worse than they are simply because they were having a bad day yesterday when they were doing much better today. So it lets you look at a team's abilities and really take them for where they are now instead of where they were a little while ago, much better. All right, data visualization. This is the third part. How are you going to do it? Are you guys going to do it in spreadsheets again? Spreadsheets are great for this. If you guys make sure you guys don't just have a bunch of numbers up there that are meaningless. Make sure that you guys have some of the averages or weighted sums like I mentioned earlier. But once you guys do, just displaying it all in a spreadsheet can be a very good way to look at it. Charts are also very great. If you guys have either scatter graphs or bar charts like the one on the slide here, that's great ways to do comparisons between different teams or all the teams as a whole. For example, going through here, this is a graph for matches played and then game pieces scored. So you can go through it, you can look at it, and you say, hey, this team was performing better in these matches, but this team performed better in these other matches. Graphs are a really great way to easily see data. I've got Tableau written up here. Tableau is a free software that anyone can download It does have a paid version as well. I believe if any of you guys are associated with a school district, you may be able to get that for free as long as you go through your school district to purchase it. It is a very good software. It does graphs. That's what it does. It won't do some of this other stuff, but if you guys have a bunch of data, especially if it's already in the form of a spreadsheet, you can just import that directly into Tableau, and it makes it really, really easy to get some amazing graphs and to see basically any sort of comparison between different relationships between different data points, or just relationships between different teams that you want to look at. If you guys are building your own app or website to do data visualization, that's great. Once again, you're going to have a lot more control over basically whatever kind of visualization you see and whatever it looks like. You guys can change basically anything about that. Once again, this is the most customizable way, but it's also going to be the most labor intensive. You're going to have a person or probably multiple people keeping these up to date year to year, and it's going to be a rather big time investment to get them built in the first place. Okay, so moving on now from those first four categories of how scouting is, we're going to break. I want to break this up into objective and subjective scouting. These are the two main different kinds of scouting. These are quantitative versus qualitative data points that you're collecting. One is how many game pieces did this team score? Did they engage in auto? Did they dock? That sort of thing. The other is how aware are they, is their driver of the field? Can they effectively figure out where they're going? Do they run into their teammates a lot? Do they block the supply zone? All these sorts of things are very important. Both sides are very, very important when considering teams. Not just one, not just the other. So it's very important to consider both. But if you have a limited number of scouts, you're going to have to make decisions. Do we want this more? Do we want this more? Which kind of data do we prioritize more? What are we putting on our different scouts? You can't have one scout scout everything about every robot in every match. It's just not possible. If you have a limited number of scouts, each of them is only going to be able to manage a certain number of stuff. So while it's obviously better to have the more data, the better. I do suggest start with some of the stuff that's easier. Start with qualitative, and if you've got a couple more scouts, go into quantitative. Really try and get that as much as you can. Quantitative can also be a little bit harder for scouts themselves to figure out. So if you can have some scouts who are maybe part of your strategy team as well, or at least know a little bit about it to help with the qualitative scouting, that helps a ton because they might be able to better recognize, hey, that robot's driver is actually a really great driver, or hey, that robot's driver is bumping into their teammates a lot, and see the difference between that to, hey, that robot's driver looks really good, but actually they just have an open path every time, and they're not actually running into any resistance. Or, hey, it looks like they're really messing up their teammates, but it's actually their teammates that are messing up them and are kind of pushing them into that position. So all of that it can be kind of complicated at times, but it's still really, really important data to have and will be incredibly helpful when looking not just at Picklist, but also match strategy and that sort of thing. Oh yeah, some sort of forms of data collection are also more suited for one of these rather than the other. For example, Google Forms is not great for subjective scouting. It's generally we found that it doesn't work very well. It's hard for subjective scouts using Google Forms to actively input their thoughts or to choose rankings based off of it. It's much easier, we found either through an app or even really through paper for subjective scouts to do that. Objective scouts, paper can be sometimes very hard. If you're trying to note down how many game pieces did this team score, how are you going to do that? Are you going to have them fill in a bubble at the end? Are they going to have to remember it until then? Are they doing tally marks? Well, then whoever's inputting that data is going to have to count all those tally marks, and that can get really complicated. It's much more labor intensive. So just be careful when you're doing that. Try and think about what kind of scouting you're doing, and that might also play into which one of these that you're looking at. Use TBA. I'm sure you guys all know what TBA is. It's a great website. They've got a ton of data, more data than any team could possibly collect. Use it. Statbotics as well. They have amazing amounts of data. Even if you're not pulling, you can pull directly from them if you guys are creating your own app or website. You can go onto their website and you can create algorithms to say, hey, whenever a match is played in this division, pull this score for us. And so if you guys are trying to maybe double check some of your own scouting data or anything like that, I would greatly suggest using these websites that have all this information and try and pull some of it, try and use some of it in your own calculations. Even if you're not building your own app and you're using Google Forms or paper scouting, it can still be really, really great to look at TBA, just get an idea based off of OPR and different things like that, how good different teams are, and compare it against your own data. It's not always the best. It misses a lot of nuances. For example, they don't know if 200 points were scored in a match, did all 3 teams contribute equally? Was it just 2 teams? Was it just 1 team? They have no way of knowing that. So that's the kind of thing that gets lost often in TBA, but it can still be really, really great resource, and I suggest you all look at it. I'm sure most of you guys already do, but look at it whenever you guys are doing strategy or that sort of thing because it has so much data in it. Small teams versus large teams. So I got into this a little bit earlier, but what kind of scouting you're doing and how you're doing it is going to be dependent on how many scouts you have. If you've only got 2 scouts, I'm going to suggest that you do subjective. You have 1 scout per alliance, and try to have them take as much data about that team as you can. If you have a bunch of teams, maybe you have, I don't know, a dozen scouts, then maybe you want to have a number of them on objective, collecting maybe 1 on each robot, saying, hey, how many game pieces did this robot score? All this is you should really take into consideration when you're looking at how big your team is. Some methods of scouting just aren't going to work for smaller teams, and some might be only viable for larger teams simply because they have more people available to scout. If you don't try and put too much on 1 scout again, if 1 scout is doing more things, the worse they're going to do all of those things. If you're trying to make a scout watch for a bunch of different things on a bunch of different robots, they're going to miss stuff, they're going to be less accurate, and while no scout is ever going to be perfectly accurate, the more stuff they're doing, the less accurate they're going to be, and that's always a trade-off you need to remember when giving scouts stuff to do. Feeding into this, scouting rotations. Scouting is very tiring, especially mentally on scouts. If they're just sitting there, staring, watching matches all day during competition, just sitting in the bleachers without a break, their accuracy is going to get very, very low near the end. No scout wants to be sitting there for 4.5, 5 hours without a break, just staring there. Make sure you give them breaks. Also, they're your team members. I'm pretty sure they're going to want to go explore on the competition, either help out with you guys a little bit in the pits, or go talk to other teams even. Not only will giving them more regular rotations help give you better data because they won't be as fatigued, but they'll have fun and they'll want to come to competition instead of not wanting to come to competition, which is never where you want any of the members of your team to be. You don't want someone to be like, oh, I could go to competition, but if I have to scout, then I'm just going to be sitting there and it's going to be a terrible experience. Maybe I don't like competition anymore. That's not what you guys want for your teammates. So give them, let them rotate in and out. Also keep that in mind when especially if you've got a smaller team and how many scouts you're working with. Really keep in mind, try and rotate them out as frequently as you can. All right. So now I'm going to give you guys a brief look at our scouting system and how we do some things as examples for what to do. Our scouting system is not perfect. It makes mistakes. We make mistakes. It's built by humans. It's run by humans. Mistakes are inevitable. But hopefully by showing you guys this, you guys are going to be able to take a little bit of inspiration from this, look at it a little bit, all of that. All right, so purpose/overview. Like I said before, we do data collection, we process, we do calculations, and then we visualize it. Our processing and calculations happens at a similar step to our data storage, simply because of how we do it. We store all in a database and run collections on it at the same time. But yeah, this is how it looks. Should look pretty similar based off of what I just went over in earlier slides. We try and stick to this very cleanly as well. We have scouting data and pit data that we collect. We send it to our server to store it and run calculations on it. And then that gets sent to our viewer in our Picklist editor or to display the data. Those are in turn used for match strategy and alliance selection and hopefully helps us win competitions. Structure, how do we do it? So we use a combination of apps that we've built ourselves for our front end and then a server that we built for back end. Our front end apps, we generally write in Kotlin and XML. Kotlin, for those of you guys who don't know, is a coding language. It's very similar to Java. XML is a pseudo language. we just use it to create UIs, all the buttons, everything like that. And front end deals with both the collection of all the data, so match collection, pit collection, and then the visualization of all that data through a series of different apps. Backend both stores and runs calculations on our data. It's written completely in Python, and it's a database in the cloud that they'll take the data to and then send it up to. So first, match collection. This is a picture of our match collection app from last year, actually, one of the screens in it. We run it on tablets. We take and we'll just have scouts sit there with the tablets. For example, in last year's game, I'm assuming a number of you guys probably know last year's game pretty well. Probably. I'm seeing some nods. That's good. We had our scouts record whenever a team intook a ball. So if they intook a ball, they'd hit intake. If they scored high, they scored high. If they scored low, they scored low. And with that, we were able to record a lot of information. Those were the main piece of objective data that we needed that year. Climb attempt, you can also see on there. So if they tried to climb, where did they climb to? All examples of objective data. We have 18 scouts. We have a very large team. Most teams are not going to be able to field 18 scouts. Is it strictly necessary? Not really. But it does help improve our data. Because we have 3 scouts per robot, we can coordinate that data and look at the differences between to try and get a more accurate representation of what robots were actually doing. There is also a subjective side to match collection. We have them in the same app. We just have different people using different parts of it at a time. We'll have 3 subjective scouts as well, or 2 subjective scouts at a time working, one on either alliance, just watching robots, trying to figure out all of these subjective things about them. I got ahead of myself there. My apologies. This is a picture of our subjective page. So as you guys see, we rank teams on quickness and field awareness, along with whether the subjective scouts will check whether or not they're playing defense. So quickness and field awareness. Quickness is how fast is your robot? How fast does it move? All of that. But also, if you can move really fast, but you're not really able to control it, it's jerky, things like that, that'll also go into quickness a little bit. Field awareness is, hey, how aware of you is your driver of all the other robots in the field? For example, in this year, if your driver or your robot was constantly getting stuck in either the zone where you pick up cubes or cones or in your scoring zone in your community, that wouldn't be very great because we want a lot of robots moving through there at all times. So that would all go into field awareness. How aware of you is the driver of other robots playing defense on them? All this is very important, like I mentioned before, or really important statistics to have. We would rank each of the teams on an alliance 1 through 3, and that's how we do it, just to kind of eliminate some of that subjective bias between different super scouts. If you're simply, we find it a lot easier for them to look at 3 robots and say, that one is the best, that one is the worst, that one's in the middle. Rather than, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, how good is each of those 3 teams? We found that was a lot more prone to mistakes and a lot more prone to vast differences between different subjective scouts. And you really want all of your subjective scouts to be as accurate and as correct in comparison to each other as possible. So that's what we found is just having them rank each of the different robots in an alliance worked much better for that and really helped improve that. Afterwards, we'll be able to look at it and say, well, if this robot is better than this robot in this match, and we know how those robots lean up against a bunch of other robots in other matches, then together we can kind of rank all of the different robots in respect to each other. Obviously, there will be still some discrepancies. Maybe one robot had a really bad match, but hopefully you can factor those out in your data processing and really just try and make a good ranking for it. This is how we found to make it the most accurate. This is how our app flows a little bit, just really quick looking at it. We have our starting screen, and from there, the scout will either be an objective scout or a subjective scout. They'll input their match number. They'll get whatever team they're doing right then, and then they'll go to their collection page. They will collect whatever data we're having them collect for that year here in that match. Then they'll confirm, yes, I am this scout. Yes, this is the team I was scouting. Yes, this is the match number. And then they will go and it will take all of the data they did and will turn it into a QR. We use QRs to pass our data back and forth between our match collection app and then our server. You can use other things. At times we've used Bluetooth, but both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, like I mentioned before, it's competition. It's the stands. They're not going to work the best always. You can't always have reliable Wi-Fi during competition. Hotspotting, obviously, don't do that. Bluetooth also is sometimes not the best during competition. It fizzes out a lot. We notice that when we try and send QR codes wirelessly through Bluetooth, sometimes we'll miss part of the QR codes, which is not great. So we just do a QR code, and we've got a couple of scanners, like the ones you see in grocery stores, that'll scan the QR codes, store the QR codes, and then later we can use that to directly upload into our server. Why QRs? Like I mentioned before, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, USB, they just don't really work as well in the stands during competition when you're trying to go fast. They aren't the best. You'll drop some stuff, you'll drop some data, and yeah, we found them to be the best thing for us. There are many other different things that other teams use. We happen to use QR codes, and we found that they work. Our next collection app is Pick Collection. This, I'm sure you guys have seen it before, or some of you guys probably have pit scouts of your own. They'll go around, generally Friday or the beginning of Saturday, go around to all the different teams in their pits, ask them different things about the robot. As you can see here, can your robot climb? Does it have vision? Can it intake from the ground from last year? All of these were important things to know, and you wouldn't really get them from watching the match, either subjectively or objectively. So we go through this. We run it on a phone. It's a separate app from the match collection app from before. It takes a couple of pictures of the robot too, just so that we can look at it later during Picklist if we need to. But overall, it's just trying to get these couple of key information, and that could be really important to whether or not you want to work with this robot during Picklist. It's not used as much during match collection or match strategy. It is a little bit sometimes. Some parts of the information could be very useful. However, for the most part, this is more used during Picklist. We're trying to decide, hey, do we want to work with this robot or not? Well, let's look at some of these things. Would any of these be a deal breaker for us? Let's go. This is the app flow. Oh, there's a list of all the teams, and whatever team they're working with at the moment. They'll click on that team. They'll input information about it, and then they'll take some pictures of the team. Very simple. We're just going to try and collect the same basic information about every team. We won't always get to every team. We won't always get all the information, but we try and get as much as we can through this. All right. After we take all of that information from both our front end, from both of our collection apps, we take that information from front end and through QRs or through for Pick Collection. Actually, it's sent in wirelessly because it's a phone and there's more time. It's not on as much of a time management. We don't use QRs for that. But all of that gets sent over to our backend. Our backend will run different calculations. Many of the ones I talked about earlier in the slides, we run for ourselves. Lots of averages. Averages are great. We consolidate the data from the 3 different scouts, for objective scouts, really trying to figure out how many balls or how many game pieces did this robot actually score during this match. Say we've got one scout who said they scored 7. One said they scored 3, and another said they scored 4. They probably didn't score 7, unless that one scout, or unless 2 scouts were really far off. So we can take all that data, and we can look at it, and we can try and figure out exactly what they scored. We can try and predict what are the previous matches going to look like in the future. How many RP are different teams going to get? Which team's going to win? What are the rankings going to look like at the end? Yeah, schema is just how we format our data. And then Grosbeak. At the end, after server's done doing all of that, it's going to take it and send it to sort of a middleman, which is Grosbeak. Grosbeak is a web server that we've got. It's pretty simple. It's going to just take that data, and then it's going to distribute it to our viewer phones. I'm going to get to them in a minute, but that's how our match strategists look at our data and see it updating through our competition. It is not always the best. We have had significant problems with this, especially at larger competitions. For example, at Champs, it did not work very well because there's a lot of people there. Internet and even in cellular data does not work that well. And as such, that part of our link between our system got a little bit fuzzy at times and didn't quite work as well as we would have liked. So once again, just a precaution when you guys are trying to do things like that, really remember if you're going through the internet, if you're going through Bluetooth, anything like that at competition, just be wary because it might not always work. Yeah. Server, it's on MongoDB. They take a bunch of data from the Blue Alliance as well. They use it to help figure out, say, for our different matches, we do the consolidation with the 3 different scouts like I mentioned before, and one team got 4, one team got 3, and one team got 3 again. And then the blue line says, hey, they scored 15 game pieces, and we've only got 10. Well, then there's a discrepancy there somewhere, and we need to go back, and maybe we give more weight to the person who says, hey, they scored 7, not 3 or 4. And we use that to more double-check our previous data than anything else. Like I said, it's got a ton of data. You can use it for a lot. So this is what the structure of the database looks like. I'm not going to spend too long on it. It's not an SQL database. It's all document-based. There's no tables in it. Yeah, this is a brief infographic of what it looks like. I'm not going to spend too long on this, though. Manipulating data in MongoDB. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to do this. This is very, very specific to what we do with MongoDB, even more so than the rest of the presentation. You can look at this, though. We create, obviously, we read, update, and delete documents all the time when doing this. Yeah. This is just a little bit more of a look at the database. Grosbeak, I mentioned this a little bit before. It's kind of the middleman between our cloud database and our viewers as a whole. It's going to take all that data and really just act as another transference viewer. We've tried other things before Grosbeak and our web server. We've had a couple of different things before that. We've tried having no middleman in between. In the end, this is just what we've come to. We might change it again in the future, but right now this works for us for the most part, and so we've been keeping it for, we've only had it for about 2 years, but you know. It's been working for mostly for those 2 years, so hopefully we won't be changing it soon. Visualization. So I mentioned this a little bit briefly earlier in with our viewer phones. This is what our match strategists use when they're trying to figure out what their strategy is going to be at the match, or they're going to visit different teams and they want to look up statistics on those different teams. It's run on a couple of different phones. These are phones that our team bought and then bought data plans for just a couple of months during competition season. If it will work on any Android phone, so some of our match strategists or our strategists, if they have an Android phone, we'll just run it on that instead. We take all of our data, and it takes all of the data from our server, and we can use it to do also, and it basically just displays it. We've got graphs in it, we've got rankings, all sorts of things. We've got a pick list on it so that during Sunday it can connect the pick list together, and different strategists, when making notes or updating the pick list, can be seen by all of the other strategists. It makes it a lot easier for them to coordinate with each other, especially if one of them's in the pits, one of them's in the stands, one of them's with the drive team going to a match. It makes it a lot easier for them to really keep in contact with each other, to look at the same data, just in case no matter where they are. They don't need to come find someone else who's got a computer somewhere. They can just pull out a phone, open up an app, and look at whatever data they want. This is a couple of the screens from it. The first is one of our graphs for a team, just showing how many balls did they score that one. We have rankings. Once again, like I mentioned before, this is just going to be the rankings. They're pulled from TBA. TBA is pretty good with that sort of thing, once again. And then we've got predicted ranking as well, which is more of based off of the calculations that we've done, based off how good we think these different teams are, how many points we think they're going to score in the upcoming matches, how many RP are they going to get, and based off that, where are they going to rank at the end. All right. Then we've got our schedule. It's just a match schedule. It's a nice, easy way for a strategist to go through, be able to click on different matches, figure out where different things are, that sort of thing. And that's just a pull-up. You can see we've got match schedule, rankings, live pick list, offline pick list, pickability, teams list, and then preferences. Preferences will just let our strategists, whoever they are, select exactly which data values they want. We have a lot of different data values, like I mentioned earlier. We run averages on basically everything. We try and have more data rather than less in basically every regard. But that gets really cluttered to look at if you're a strategist trying to look at it all, trying to figure out what data is important. So they only look at a small subsection of the data at a time. Exactly what they're looking at will differ strategist to strategist, but generally they'll look at a couple of big things. How many game pieces are they scoring? What kind of game pieces in this game? All of that thing. How are they engaging? How successfully are they engaging? All of that. All right. And then the second kind of visualization that we do is for a pick list. Pick list should be done Saturday night. I believe there's a presentation on it tomorrow sometime if you guys want to go see that more. But what we do here is we just take all of our data. Instead of viewer where you can just look at one team at a time, you can do a couple of teams if you're doing side-by-side graphs. Here, the goal is to have all of the team's data right there, right next to each other, so that people can see it and very easily say, this team is above this team, or team B is worse than team C, whatever it is. They need to be able to see it, and to do that, they need to be able to see all of the different data very, very easily. I'm just looking at the picture right there. You guys can see we run it on a spreadsheet. We found that's the easiest to show massive amounts of data with respect to different teams. So, but with a couple of different color formats, it's very easy to say, hey, look, X number is bigger than Y number. X number is background is greener. That one number is red. That background is redder. Therefore, maybe we don't want to. It makes it really easy to visually see data. If you just have a bunch of numbers, it becomes very cluttered very quickly. It becomes very hard to actually see stuff. But even so, spreadsheets are very good ways to do this. You can run your pick list however you guys want. If you guys are going to build a separate thing for your pick list to display all the data, though, I would heavily suggest spreadsheets just because they're so good at doing this. Whether or not it's Google Spreadsheets or something else, whatever you guys want. We go through DMPs as well. There's a lot of teams at every competition. So sometimes, and it will depend on competition by competition, some of our strategists will look for do not pick qualities in a certain team. These can be a number of different things. For example, if a team, say, broke down and was unable to move in half their matches, we are not going to want to form an alliance with them, and we're going to put them on our do not pick list. We do not have a do not pick list that extends over multiple competitions. We will have one for a singular competition. Everything starts fresh at the next competition because everyone's bringing a different robot, or at least a robot that has had more modifications done on it. And as such, yeah. We will also occasionally DMP teams if they, for various other reasons outside of direct performance. For example, if the drive team found them incredibly difficult to work with, or something along that line, we will occasionally DMP teams for that. However, generally, if we're going to DMP a team, it's simply because we don't feel like we could form an effective alliance with them. All right, so here's our system at competition. This is how we run stuff. We've got our lead scout and assistant. They help manage everything. They manage the data collection, and both with the objective scouts and the super scouts or subjective scouts. Our subjective scouts are going to be members of our strategy subteam, so they're going to be more trained in that. They're going to be knowing what to look for. Our objective scouts are going to be all of our other scouts. We've got 18 at a time, like I mentioned before, with roughly three at a time taking a break. Subjective scouts will have 2 at a time, 1 for each alliance, 1 taking a break. We've got 2 stand strategists who are more veteran strategy members whose jobs it is to note down any inconsistencies, anything else that's not being caught. Maybe something happens on the field and they know nothing else in the scouting system is going to catch this. Maybe a team, they look really good on all of these other things, and we know they are, but maybe they went in cap, but it wasn't their fault. They went in cap for a long time, it looked really bad, but hey, another team smashed into them, broke part of their robot, and then got a tech foul because of that. Like, that's gonna not look great on our data, but it's not the team's fault. And so we want to note that and make sure that we're not counting that against them if they get their robot fixed in time. So stand strategists will collect all sorts of notes about that. And then we also have our video system and our scouting developers. Our video system, we tend to take videos of every match at a competition. They're not the best. They're not great quality, but we'll just set up a camera in the stands, take videos, and so if during the picklist meeting or anytime later we want to go review, say, hey, we don't have any notes, but we've got an extreme outlier of a match right here. What happened? What was happening during this match? And that caused that. We can pull that up and we can look at it. Our scouting developers are members of our team who help build the apps or help run server, and they're going to be there just fix stuff if it breaks. Similar to the pit team during competition. If the robot breaks, the pit team needs to fix it. The scouting developers are there for if the scouting system breaks, they're going to fix it. We also have, in the pits, we're going to have our pit strategist, who is going to be our match strategist. They're going to go through, they're going to be one of the users of the viewer app. They're going to be formulating match strategies for every one of our matches and all of that. We're also going to have some strategy mentors who are going there. We always have some mentors in the pitch. They're going to be offering insights and different things like that during competition as well. So what are our philosophies going into our system? Documentation is very, very important. Never throw anything away. We try never to delete anything ever. If we are no longer using a document, throw it in the team drive somewhere. We've got a folder called archive for old stuff. We just put it there. And then later, if we need it, we can go through, we can look at it. It might take us a couple minutes to find it, but we can find it, and it's still there, and it's not just gone. Same with our code. We have a bunch of old repositories from past years. We're not going to delete the code and just start over. We're going to create a new repository every year and build off of that. We also want to minimize year-specific features. For some apps, you're going to have to change some stuff year to year, right? Like, what kind of are you collecting how many balls are scored, or are you collecting how many cones or cubes? Now there's 2 different game pieces instead of 1. Very different game from last year. So obviously changes need to get made to how we collect data and to how we show data. But the more data, the more code that you can preserve year to year, the less work that you have to do year to year to get it back up to date. And that lets you do a whole lot more. It makes if you have less time spent just updating the apps year to year, that means you've got more time to spend in making sure that there are no bugs, into improving the apps, to giving additional functionality. All of that, just improving your scouting system, comes from, first and foremost, minimizing year-specific features, because that stuff, it's going to last 8 months, 9 months, and then you're just going to have to recode it anyways. Whereas if you can have code that can last 7 years, or at least, at the very least, 2 or 3 years, that's a lot of time that you don't have to spend rewriting that code. End-to-end development, we have both of our ends talking to each other constantly. We're technically one sub-team. We are the scouting sub-team. We might have a front end, we might have a back end. Every individual kid in the sub-team is either on the front end or the back end. They code in completely different languages. Despite that, we are still one sub-team because we work so deeply together. We require any code that's merged with either one of them, someone from the other sub-team also needs to look at, just so that we have a feel constantly for what's going on together. We try and test constantly. If we're going to bring our system in competition, we cannot have massive amounts of bugs in it. It just won't work. If you try and bring it to competition, and that's your first real stress test for the system, just as you practice with your robots and you make sure that you guys have stress tests for the robots too, you need the same for your scouting systems, otherwise they're going to fail. User communication, try and minimize the overload. Once again, the less scouts are doing, the better they're going to do it. The more they're doing, the worse that they're going to do it. Have them train. If you can get all of their scouts to come to a 3-hour meeting, a 3-hour extra meeting sometime, just sit in front of a screen, watch some old matches, have them play around with the scouting system, get used to it, ask any questions if they don't understand. That'll help immensely, because all of the things that they don't understand, you want them not understanding before competition rather than at competition, because otherwise you're going to get much more faulty data, especially at the start of competition. And then finally, collaboration with the strategy sub-team. A number of teams, I believe, have a scouting system and a strategy sub-team that are one and the same. We do not. We have them as separate different sub-teams in our team. The strategy sub-team is a secondary sub-team for us, meaning that any member of any other sub-team can join the strategy. They have a couple of extra meetings that the rest of the team does not go to throughout the week, and that is all that is required. However, scouting works very, very closely with them, seeing as many of their members are our users for our different apps, and they have to coordinate with us to figure out what do they find important, what kind of data points do they want, all of that. As you can imagine, there's also a very large overlap for people who are in scouting and people who are in strategy, simply because they work so much in overlap. All right. I'm going to be wrapping up the presentation now. And taking questions. And these are a couple of different resources if you guys want. The white papers for us can detail our code in varying amount of details, generally pretty in-depth though. You guys can go through, you guys can look at it. It explains our entire system in much more depth than I had a chance to here. It can probably answer a lot of questions that you guys have. And then our GitHub. Our GitHub has all of our public code. It has all the code from our 2023 season as well. If you guys have any questions that are very in detail about our code for this season, you guys can go on there, you guys can look at it, and can try and find the answers. If you guys don't know how we do something or how we did something, feel free to look in there. All right. Thank you. Oh, I'm also supposed to show you guys this QR. I don't know what it is. The fall workshop people told me to put it at the end of my slideshow. So, surprise! Someone want to yell out what it is?
It's a Google form.
It's a Google form. Is it a survey about how well I presented or how much you guys enjoyed it?
Yeah.
Give me a 10.
So.
5 stars. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Oh.
Is there anywhere we can find the presentation?
Yes. So I believe these will be posted at a later date, along with the recording that's still happening on the Fall Workshops website, I believe, or the Capital City Classic website. I'm not sure when they'll be posted. I believe last year it took almost a month and a half before they were posted. Hopefully this year will be faster, but they will be posted at some point. Yes. Any other questions?
So one of the main things that our field scouting team does on more of the subjective side is they'll do the same thing that you guys do. One of the things that we try and push in trainings is to not kind of put their own personal opinions onto the line and onto the guide team. Is there any way that you would go about trying to phrase that to people and like tell them to not just say things about the other teams, but to write down what they see?
Yeah. So that's a tough question, obviously. Some part of subjective, like how well is this team is going to make it in there, and you want it to. You don't want to end up with teams who are terrible to work with. That's going to affect your performance on the field as well. That is something you want to take into consideration. But for your subjective scouts, if they're not the ones you want collecting that, I would just tell them, make sure you're focusing on this data. If you notice in our thing, they have no option to do that anyways. They just rank the teams, which is great. Our stand strategists will do that a little bit more maybe, but even then, they're mainly in the stands. The main place where we get that information from during Picklist or different things like that would be with our match strategist, who is working with them and coordinating the matches. The match strategist is obviously also there during Picklist, and so they will be the one, when we're talking about teams, be like, hey, I had an interaction with this team that was blank. Or our drive team members will occasionally be there as well. So all of that will factor that in when doing it. We just try and make sure that they know very much you are looking for these very specific things. If you're taking other things of note, our subjective scouts generally don't interact with the teams directly as much. They might see them during lunch, talk to them at their pits, but they're not going to be interacting with the teams directly while also doing their role as a subjective scout. And that's kind of how we've dealt with it. I'm not sure. I would just try and encourage them not to, or it may help to simply give them a very specific list of look for these specific things and give us your opinions on these things. We don't want other opinions other than those opinions. Any other questions? All right. If there are no more questions, remember you guys can always send questions to softwarescouting@citruscircuits.org. And yeah, thank you all for coming. This has been a great time presenting to you all.